The U.S. continues its multifaceted hybrid war against China in the trade and tech dimensions by banning the use of Chinese AI chips anywhere in the world, including within China. We'll discuss this and more on this week's China Report. Welcome to the China Report, made in collaboration with Pivot to Peace. Every week, we will be helping you sort through all the propaganda with an independent view of the country we are told to hate, but know so little about. I'm your host, KJ No. These are this week's headlines. U.S. considering moving troops from Korea to Guam to prepare for war with China. The U.S., according to the Wall Street Journal, is considering moving nearly 4,500 troops from South Korea to Guam and other bases in the Pacific to prepare for war with China. The Pentagon has recently denied these plans. However, Trump has wanted to reduce troops in South Korea since his last administration. Elbridge Colby, Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, has stated, "I'm in favor of reshaping U.S. forces in the Republic of Korea to focus on China," signaling his opposition to actual withdrawal in favor of in-theater preparation. In actuality, the war against China is envisioned as a single war involving multiple fronts in Korea, Taiwan Island, Okinawa, Japan, the Philippines, and the South China Sea. General Xavier Brunson, the commander-in-chief of U.S. Forces Korea, has claimed that South Korea is like a fixed aircraft carrier to counter Chinese forces. By being forward stationed, we effectively operate inside an adversary's anti-access area denial bubble, he declared. EU foreign policy chief threatens Serbia, make a choice between West and East. European Union foreign policy chief Kaja Kallas called on the Serbian government of Alexander Vučić to make a strategic choice between East and West. The unelected Kallas has been aggressively threatening the Serbian leadership, which the EU has tried to undermine because of its good diplomatic and economic relations with both Russia and China. Serbia has also seen color revolution-type demonstrations against the government. Hungary has also been urged to cut ties with China, a proposition to which the Deputy Minister Levente Magyar has responded in the negative. On questioning whether Hungary would decouple from China if the US demanded it, the Deputy Minister responded, "Definitely not. That's a red line for us. We're having excellent trade relations with China." South Korea prosecutes anti-China lies in run-up to election. South Korean police are seeking an arrest warrant for a Korean reporter who claimed 99 Chinese spies were captured during Yoon's martial law. The journalist working for the Korean outlet Sky Daily faces charges of false reporting and obstructing public duty. Rumors and lies of Chinese spies and Chinese election interference have figured significantly in both Yoon's martial law declaration and in the counter-reaction against his impeachment. The upcoming election in South Korea on June 3rd has geostrategic consequences for the United States, depending on whether another anti-China administration like Yoon can be ushered in. U.S. discloses the presence of 500 U.S. troops on Taiwan Island. Retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery disclosed during congressional testimony that currently around 500 U.S. military personnel are garrisoned in Taiwan. This stationing is an open flaunting of China's red lines and signals continuing U.S. preparations for war with China. It also violates the three communiques which had agreed to remove all U.S. troops from Taiwan Island as a condition for normalized relations. Taiwan Island had previously been used as a U.S. forward base to threaten and attack mainland China, and was often described as an unsinkable aircraft carrier. However, this disclosure accords with the Congressional Terror Act passed in December of 2022, which calls for a permanent rotational presence of U.S. troops on the island. It's widely considered that the U.S. seeks to trigger war with China by using Taiwan as a Ukraine-type proxy and provocation. And in history today is the 45th anniversary of the Gwangju massacre in South Korea. Starting May 18th, the South Korean military, at the time under U.S. operational control, were released from OPCON to massacre protesting students and citizens in the southern city of Gwangju. On May 27th, with the USS Coral Sea guarding its flank, at daybreak, 20,000 troops of the Korean 20th Division, 31st Division, 7th, 11th, and 3rd Special Warfare Brigades, with the full knowledge and endorsement of the United States government, entered the city of Gwangju from the north, the northwest, west, southwest, south, southeast, east, and northeast, with tanks, armored personnel carriers, and helicopters, and massacred its final resistance. This was the culmination of a 10-day process. On the 18th, paratroopers began beating, stabbing, raping, and killing unarmed civilians who had been protesting a US-backed military coup government. The citizens fought back, driving out troops and holding the city as a liberated zone for 10 days, the longest civilian liberation of a city since the Paris Commune. Naive Koreans who had sought US support and assistance were misguided. The US coordinated and delayed the South Korean attack so that US reinforcements, including an aircraft carrier, could be brought into theater. Ellen Barfield, stationed in an army maintenance unit in Korea at the time, stated that US troops were also training for riot suppression of Korean civilians during this period. The exact number and killed and injured by troops is debated. However, city records show an unexpected spike of over 2,000 deaths that month. And on a brighter note, Chinese man wakes up his vegetative wife with dancing and singing. A Chinese husband, Deng Yuchao, persisted in taking care of his wife, Ye Meidi, who was in a vegetative state after multiple surgeries to treat her brain cancer. After years of persistent care and attention, she finally awoke and is now recovered and working. According to the South China Morning Post, he refused her request to end her life and kept her in intensive care while singing and dancing to her daily until she woke up. The U.S. Commerce Department has issued guidance stating that any use of Huawei's Ascend AI chips anywhere in the world violates U.S. export controls. This was later softened. The ban targets Huawei's Ascend AI chips, in particular 910C and 910D, which are designed to compete with NVIDIA's high-end chips, which have been banned from export to China. The ban is part of an all-encompassing effort to curb China's development in AI and chips in general, and trying to freeze its technological development in place. China has criticized the US ban, accusing it of unilateral bullying. To discuss this, I'm joined by Carl Zha of Silk and Steel podcast and Professor Warwick Powell of the Taihe Institute. Welcome, Carl and Warwick.
How are you?
So I'm going to jump right in. Carl and Warwick, I assume that both of you have been following this. What's going on here? Why is the US doing this? And why are chips so important in this situation? Dr. Powell.
Me first. I was hoping Carl would be throwing the hard question to get the ball rolling, but I'll do my best.
Look. Yeah, go ahead.
Look, chips, of course, is the engine room for computation as far as data is concerned, and the aim is to enable the rapid computation of large amounts of data to assist in all sorts of fields of activity, whether it's in logistics planning or in medical research, or ultimately, of course, in defense and military applications. And there is a fear, if you will, that China will be able to match the United States' capabilities in these various areas and arguably steal a march. I think that's one part of it. But I think the other part of it, and this goes to the attempt to ban everybody from using these ships, is to try to forestall the development of a system that I've described in the past as digital Westphalia, which is the idea that nations around the world can progressively extricate themselves from an American big tech dominated ecosystem and pursue technology development strategies that are anchored far more in the idea of digital sovereignty and being able to deploy software applications, run AI models that are basically built locally, running on open source capabilities, rather than being trapped in American big tech ecosystems. And that's arguably the last thing that the United States wants to see happen, both in a geopolitical sense, but also in a straight down the line commercial sense. So this is a protection racket. It has commercial dimensions to it, and it also has geopolitical dimensions to it as well.
Carl, your thoughts?
Well, I think Professor Powell has hit nail on the head when he says it's a racket, because what's going on right now, if you follow the money, Donald Trump has just announced the $500 billion Stargate project. Now, this is a huge investment. This is because right now there's an AI bubble that's being developed in United States. They're trying to get anybody and their mother to invest in AI in United States. This is why Trump went to the Gulf countries. You know, the reason he was talking to the head of UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia is United States does not have the $500 billion to invest in the so-called Stargate project. He needs the Gulf Arab money, and he needs them to invest their trade surplus into this AI bubble. Now China present a clear and present danger to this AI bubble, because we saw what happened with DeepSeek. When the DeepSeek moment happened, $1 trillion was wiped out from the U.S. stock market, because people are finally waking up to this. Why are we investing $500 billion in this boondoggle when they train DeepSeek for $5 million? And so they rightly saw China as a competitor in AI space, but they also saw that the threat of China in bringing down the price, like China do with everything. When China enters a field, the price come down. We saw that happen with first toys, shoes, and then electronics, and now that's going to move to EVs as well. But what the AI is what they consider one of the last frontier where they think the US still have a slight edge, and they want to preserve that by, in the spirit of competition, by way of Tanya Hardin, they want to kneecap China's progress. So this does not threaten their own their tech dominance, and also it does not blow up the incipient AI bubble that's building in the U.S. Stock market right now.
Of course, there is an AI bubble, but also the U.S. AI tech companies have explicitly boosted the value of AI in terms of waging war against China. Now, we know that currently the U.S. has an edge in compute, but it doesn't really have an edge in data or algorithms, which are all part of the three-legged stool that make up what AI is. So in that context, can you say a little bit about what it means for the US to have a kind of digital Wolfitz doctrine, whereby they seek to dominate AI, not simply as a business, but also in terms of literally a military competition?
Well, I mean, this is one of the chief reason a lot of the people who are building up the AI hype in US are justifying all this $500 billion investment into Stargate project by saying, okay, we have to win this race versus China because, once we develop AI will do everything, that because whoever then controls AI will win the war. For them, it's a zero-sum game. Like the United States must win this at all costs. This justifies, the insane amount of money they're pouring into the AI race right now. I mean, the competition with China is one of their chief justification for doing this. And I think for many of them, this is really more of a grift because there is really just to blow up the AI bubble even further by saying this is a national security issue. It's a do or die issue. We cannot let China surpass us. It appeals to people's American supremacist mindset. People are have their identity kind of so intertwined with the idea that United States must remain number one. They will do anything to justify it, even when there's much needed investment into infrastructure, education. But no, let's put everything into AI because that's where we need to go right now in order to win against China. But I think at the end of the day, it's still about money. I think half of these people don't even believe a word they're saying. They are doing this as a grift to line their own pocket. If you look at even like people like Palantir, they are selling bloatware. I mean, okay, yes, they are enabling U.S. military industrial complex. They're enabling genocide in Gaza. They are they're doing all that, all everything they said they would do, but at the same time their ultimate aim is to profit, to profit from human misery, to profit from sucking the money from the US taxpayers base into their own pocket. That's what really is all about at the end of the day.
Yes, and I think that we can certainly see that AI is being sold as the literal killer app, the ultimate killer app, if you will. Dr. Powell, what do you think about that proposition that this is literally a grift? Of course, we know that the Ascend chip is being sold at 50% of the price of the NVIDIA chip, NVIDIA H20, and also the H100. And it seems like it is a significant entrant into the field. And therefore, the US is literally making it impossible for countries to use Huawei or Chinese chips. It's literally, you're with us or against us. You have to make a choice. Dr. Powell, your thoughts about this?
Well, American big tech has always been intimately intertwined with the interests of American defense. And this goes back to the 1950s and the 1960s. Silicon Valley today wouldn't be what it is had it not been for the ongoing and substantial financial contributions made to it, either directly by the Pentagon and the Department of Defense or indirectly via research and development contracts through universities and research institutions such as Rand Corporation. So the first point to remember here is that big tech and the American defense sector, or the military industrial complex, to put it more directly, have been intimately intertwined for a long time. What is happening a little bit at the moment is that there are some new kids on the block who are moving in on the action, and because they have seen that there is substantial largesse. And I think Carl's right when he says that by and large, many of these folk don't necessarily believe anything that they say, but they also know that this is exactly what you need to say at the moment to jump onto the gravy train. It is the ticket, for the best seats on the gravy train. The second thing too to, I guess, bear in mind is that whilst there is a view that this may be the killer app today, we've been promised killer apps for a long, long time, and of course, it never seems to materialize. And we'll move from one grift and run crisis, when the bubble pops, to the next one. And the problem, I guess, now that the tech sector faces in the United States is that China is offering a viable competitive alternative in very fundamental terms, in cost terms, of course, which enables countries around the world to access technologies that previously they couldn't. So, China has a business model that essentially prices people in through abundance, whereas the West has developed a business model that prices people out through confected scarcity. And I think that this is the case right up and down the technology stack. The last piece, and perhaps there's actually a fourth leg to this stool, is the long run availability of energy. And, you can have all of your best hardware in the world. You can actually have the best algorithms as well to run on that hardware. But if you don't have, and you can have access to lots of data too. Palantir certainly is doing its best to ensure that American AI technology has access to all sorts of data from all sorts of people around the world. But you also need to have access to energy. And one of the challenges that North America in particular faces is the ability of the North American energy system, the electricity system in particular, to deliver the kind of energy requirements that the AI data centers are likely to require, and at the same time keep a lid on electricity inflation, right? So part of the problem as AI booms is that it's going to demand a lot of the available capacity, as well as put increasing pressure on the network. So the electricity distribution network and the substations that connect the network up were never designed to deal with these loads, and there will need to be massive investments in updating the electricity network to handle these loads. How that's going to get funded, particularly given that the vast majority of the electricity network in America is run by private corporations, well, it will get funded if the price is right, which means that prices for consumers and businesses are going to be affected because they're going to be facing competition for energy from data centers. So I think that these are some of the dimensions at play, and China literally represents a commercial threat amongst everything else. If you're a small business or a community organization in Africa, for sake of argument, and you had a choice between running DeepSeek on a local computer on the edge versus paying a lot of money to access a so-called open AI model, well, I know where they'd go. They'll start running local versions of DeepSeek on Huawei chips on local devices, literally down to the edge, meaning running them on computers sitting in an office somewhere, right, without big data centers. This is what China's enabling, and it's certainly not the business model that the American big tech sector wants to see on the scene.
Yes. I think that it's already been observed that the cost of AI will eventually converge to the cost of energy itself. So I think that's very important. And even as the United States talks about reindustrializing its economy, it's clear that there are no policy measures that are put into place, certainly not for the reinforcement and the building up of its energy system. But I wanted to pivot back to science and technology in particular. Carl, it seems like the U.S. wants to freeze China's technology in place. We can see that with the chip sanctions, with previously the diffusion rule, and now these attacks on Huawei's Ascend chips. But at the same time, it's also freezing U.S. funding of science and technology. What's going on here? Can you tell us what that's about?
Well, I like to say Donald Trump is my president for accelerationism because he's doing everything to make sure China will stay winning. And one of the, people, I'm old enough to remember people tell me one of the big advantage United States have versus China is the ability of United States to attract talent from all over the globe. They're really talking about the ability of US to brain drain from the rest of the world because US can offer a higher quality of living. And for decades that has been true. I know this personally because my dad came to United States as a PhD student in 1985. And when I visited my dad in 1990 in the lab of the University of Illinois, I look around the research lab. It's all Chinese grad students working there. And for decades, the US research institutions has depended on the labors of Chinese, Indian, Iranian, Russian grad students. And this hasn't changed till today. This is not to say native born Americans are dumber. What happened is a system incentivized smart people, the smart native born Americans, to go into more lucrative fields like finance, like Wall Street. So all the smart ones already went to make money in the Wall Street. It's the foreigners, the immigrants, they have to grind away in the labs. That has been the system for the United States for the longest time. But the arrogance of people with that kind of America supremacist mindset thinks everybody is fungible. Everybody just a cog in the wheel that can replace. They think, okay, no problem if we don't have Chinese, we'll replace them with Indians or whatever. And so this is the idea that I think there's a fundamental disregard for the value of labor itself in United States, because we this is why we people in United States talk about rise of China. It's never due to the hardworking Chinese people themselves. It's like, because they steal our technology. And how did they steal our technology? Their students came to our university and they learn our ways. And this is quite ridiculous because how the tech transfer actually happened. I witnessed this firsthand because my dad is the first generation of post-cultural revolution Chinese students that came to study in the United States. A lot of his classmates, they would study, graduate, and work in the U.S. corporate world until at one point they hit a glass ceiling. And this is right around 2010s, and when the Chinese economy was taking off, and they realized if they go back to China, the sky is the limit. They can be founders of companies, can be VPs. And so that's what happened. These people who have a lot of experience, build up a lot of experience working in the corporate America, now taking their experience back to China, back to take their knowledge. This just all happened organically. But the people in Washington who are making the policy right now, I don't think they spend a day in a research lab anywhere. They literally don't understand what made up for the success of America. So they're literally shooting themselves in the foot right now by restricting foreign students, closing down fundings for science education. This is also part of the kind of, I guess, the wider cultural war inside the United States, right? Like people really don't have much respect for science, which is a sharp contrast in China. Like if you look surveys after surveys, it shows that Chinese publics, they're very excited about technology. They all think that technology will bring a better future for them tomorrow. And this is a sharp contrast to the attitude in the Western world. But I'm not saying this is the Western world have as the wrong attitude. But in many ways, I think their attitude is justified because the Western governments have for decades been using technology to do really screwed up things against their own citizens, like mass surveillance. We all know about that, and we already talk about AI, how U.S. big tech is tightly embedded with the defense industry. So, I mean, people are right to be wary of U.S. government investment in technology. But whereas in China, people in China have a quite different experience with technologies. Throughout their lives, they saw technology improve their life tremendously, and this is why they're very optimistic about the technological applications. This is why also people in China are flabbergasted to see what Trump administration is doing to the science foundation of America, because they all thought that's what made America great. And well, anyway, Trump is still making China great. Like there's a Chinese internet meme saying Trump is a great builder of nation, except the nation is China. And I think that meme is playing out in real life right now.
Yes, he's also being referred to as Comrade Trump, if I'm not mistaken. Uh, but I want to come back to your point about the devalorization of science and technology in the United States. I mean, I think it's not unfair to observe that China is a country where the top leadership are scientists and engineers. So I think we can even say that China is a country that's led by engineers, whereas the United States is a country that is led by lawyers. And if we're talking about a tech war, if you pit the lawyers against the engineers in what is essentially an engineering contest, I think that outcome is pretty much predetermined. But I want to pivot to Warwick. What are your thoughts about this, Warwick? I mean, we know that the United States has taken scientific talent, intellectual talent from all over the world. This is literally the brain drain. And we know that, over generations, we first saw the Hungarians, the Hungarian Martians, and then Eastern Europeans, other Eastern Europeans, and then Chinese and Indians. They have formed the bulk of the intellectual labor force that has created the U.S. as this engineering and scientific advanced state. And now it seems that the Trump administration is trying to get rid of all of that. In fact, it's also going after Harvard University. It's denying its foreign students visas, which make up 27% of its population. What are your thoughts about this, Warwick?
Yeah, look, let's not forget that the first cohort in the years immediately after the Second World War were actually leftovers of the Third Reich. But in terms of the present situation, I think that there has been something of a turn, which is a turn against the intelligentsia. And in some ways, it's an understandable turn because the vast majority of ordinary Americans actually have not experienced a substantial improvement in their quality of life over the course of the last 30 to 40 years, whereas the elite, the Ivy League elite, who have gone on to work in Wall Street and associated services industries, have done incredibly well. So there has been a turn against the intelligentsia and the educated elite. I don't think the educated elite have necessarily helped themselves a lot either, because they also have displayed often, I think, a condescension towards ordinary working people in America that eventually rubs ordinary people up the wrong way. So the fertile ground for a popular revolt. We've also, of course, seen a revolt against a whole range of sciences, and the circumstances surrounding the way in which the United States dealt with the pandemic, I think, added fuel to the fire in terms of public skepticism and doubt around the role of the scientific community. And you add on to that, of course, the politicization of global climate questions. And you have an environment where there is heightened public skepticism directed towards the world of science. What was once the untouchables are now touchable. And as a result of that, the flip side has been the sort of cultivation of a sense that people can legitimately take pride in their anti-scientific and anti-intelligentsia kind of disposition, the eulogization of ignorance in a sense. And I say that not in a way that seeks to disparage, but just to describe this sort of cultural turn. So that's one part of the story, I think. The second part of the story, I think, is fundamentally political. And that is that many of these institutions have also been seen, rightly or wrongly, as bastions of liberalism. And the cultural turn, in a political sense, that we're witnessing is a direct attack at the pillars of the liberal intelligentsia and what is in effect the liberal class. And the attack on Harvard is a classic example. Whether or not this spreads to other institutions, I guess time will tell, but it's a clear signal that the current administration is prosecuting a comprehensive attack on the hotbeds of its own anticipated critics. And wherever they are, they're going to be targeting them to weed them out, whether it's in the old mainstream media or, of course, the Ivy League institutions where you find few friends of the administration. So there's a domestic political component, and I think there's also a broad cultural sweep. Look, the last thing I'll say on all of this is that not only have the vast majority of working Americans not experienced the material benefits of the last 30 to 40 years, that's also coincided with a significant drop in the average levels of literacy and numeracy across the American population. And one of the greatest challenges caused by that is, as we start looking at what the short-term and medium-term future begins to look like from an industry and an employment point of view, if America is to rejuvenate or expand its manufacturing capabilities, it's actually going to need a workforce with substantial literacy and numeracy skills. And the current levels simply aren't at a point that will be viably and competitively useful for the cutting edge of manufacturing industries that many aspire to achieve in the United States. So it's a bit of a cul-de-sac at the moment, because education has been politicized and it's kind of lost its way, both in terms of the liberal elite, but the flip side is that I think the reaction against that has also undermined the current cultural standing of getting a decent education.
Absolutely. And I think we can also add to that the cost of education in the United States, which is off the charts. But I want to touch back on your idea that, the intelligentsia are bred in the Ivy Leagues and the top institutions. To a certain extent, they are finishing schools for the ruling class, for the potentates and their quislings. And we also know that when we think of the liberal arts are actually derived from, what the British used to refer to as classics, which is to say the markers of education that confer class distinctions. So the liberal arts are really about those who are liberated from the need to do labor, rather than any notion of, liberalism as freedom itself in the Enlightenment sense. But I want to ask this question to Carl as well regarding Harvard University. I think it's important to point out, in the United States, Harvard is considered to be the institution, the educational institution. And I think it's also instructive to compare it to, for example, Cambridge University, which is the model from which Harvard was drawn from, which is why the city itself is called Cambridge. We know that during the same period, approximately 400 years, Cambridge University invented the scientific method. It invented physics, mechanics, multiple areas of physics. It developed several branches of math. It created 5 literary movements. It discovered the theory of evolution. And during that same period, Harvard's main scientific achievements were to invent napalm. So what are your thoughts about this, Carl? This kind of eulogization of ignorance in the United States and perhaps even in the academy itself?
For the people who have seen the movie Idiocracy, well, I never imagined that's actually a future documentary, because that's the way where United States is headed right now. And but this is it's a serious issue, where I think that you said something that was interesting earlier. You said these elite school, Ivy League school, are basically finishing school for the elite. And a lot of the time right now, the elite class is dominated by lawyers, right? And whereas China, they have their leadership is composed of engineers. And you can also see how the AI is being applied in both countries. In China, the AI has been adopted across a wide swath of manufacturing. They're using AI to make better cars, to make better EVs, and incorporate AI in their manufacturing techniques. Whereas in United States, AI is still primarily used as chatbots, right? Because that PowerPoint presentation, that's what United States has a lead over China, talking. Whereas China leads by doing things, by constructing things. And this is why well, I guess this is what Adam Smith talk about comparative advantages, right? You focus on what you do best. In China, they use AI to apply to manufacturing, and in United States, they apply AI to make more PowerPoint presentations. But this the problem with U.S. right now, I mean, the attack on universities, the cultural wars, this is just a manifestation of a deeper systematic problem. Is that it's a sharp divide between the 1% elite who are accruing all the benefits of globalization. That included hollowing out of manufacturing in United States, shipping them to East Asia. It's the big corporations, they're making a lot of money from this offshoring, and the value is accrued to the top executives and their shareholders. Again, 1%. And many of this 1% who sent their kids to places like Harvard. And whereas vast majority of Americans are being left behind. Joe Sixpack in Michigan, they saw their factory getting shipped overseas, and they don't have chance to go to Harvard, and they're the ones who are not deriving the bulk line share of the benefit of the much talk about globalization. Instead, they see their quality of life has deteriorated. The only thing they can, as compensation, is that now they can have access to cheaper consumer goods in Walmart, and they have access to cheap credits. But this system is not sustainable, and this is why I think what we're seeing right now is kind of I remember there's a Chinese professor of international studies, Zhang Weiwei from Fudan University. He actually said Trump has identified all the problems that present in the U.S. society, but all the solutions that he provided to these problems only makes the matter much worse. And I think that's what's going on right now.
I think you're right, Carl. And I think what's interesting is that, for example, Scott Bessent has said that China has to change. But ultimately, I think it's pretty obvious that it's the United States that has to change, and certainly probably more in the direction of China than in anywhere else. But coming to Dr. Powell for the last question, we know that the United States has deindustrialized over 50 years. Not only has it deindustrialized, but it is actually de-skilled. And these are systemic structural shifts that you see inside of monopoly capital, the transition to financialization. So we can say that China builds, and not only does the US bomb, but it simply financializes. China educates, and the US miseducates or uneducates. So these, as Carl has pointed out, are systemic and structural trends. And at the same time, the US is still thinking that it can take the battle to China and that it can prevail. And certainly in the financial domain, it is creating what are virtual particles of value that actually exist but don't have any real tangible existence. Can you say a little bit more about what this fundamental shift that is happening in the world is about, and how that will fall out eventually for both China and the United States?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, I think that the first thing I'll say is that I still find it a little bit hard to understand what it is when the US talks about China being a pacing threat and how it needs to prevail and this, that, and the other, in the sense that I'm actually never quite sure what prevailing means. What does winning actually look like? Does it mean that the United States once again forces China to make cheap shoes for Americans and cheap T-shirts? Is that what America winning in this American constructed contest looks like? Does it mean that that Americans are able to set up extraterritorial zones in Chinese cities? Is that what America means when it talks about, needing to prevail and contain China? So I'm never quite sure what the American political elite actually mean when they speak in these terms, But put that aside, I think one of the big changes going on in the world is we're reaching a point where the abstraction of value that has taken place in North America now for the past 30 to 40 years, meaning the financialization of its economy, the massive expansion of fictitious capital, basically has run its course. It has been the great producer of IOUs to the rest of the world, and the rest of the world is now wondering why it should keep accepting these IOUs when it can't actually get much for them. And it's even more pronounced when the rest of the world looks at its own circumstances and the circumstances of their own people and realize that their quality of life is fundamentally determined in a material sense, meaning that people need to eat, people need housing, people need access to energy, they need access to education services and health services that are actually affordable, service provided with the end in mind of helping people through an illness, as opposed to being an insurable, commoditized, financial service. So these are the sort of fundamental transitions that are taking place as the global South has reached a point, in large part because China was able to punch through the development ceiling that had been imposed by the post-World War financial system and the post-war global extractive circulation system. And China punched through that. And because of its scale, it's actually now enabling other countries in the world to take advantage of the ground that China's sort of prepared, meaning that it can access technologies, it can access education and know-how, and of course, by doing that, they're able to pursue their own development pathways with their own energy systems that are no longer dependent upon others, with data systems that we were talking about earlier, which recognizes the need to build greater sovereign capabilities within information systems. So that's the big shift that I think is taking place. And what's anchoring all of this, which I think is going to become one of the most pronounced things that many people have yet to really grasp is that there is what I've called a geopolitics of thermodynamics unfolding, and that is that unless social and economic systems can consistently drive towards more efficient uses of energy, so that you have a very high efficiency in terms of the energy return for the energy invested, then you will actually fall behind, because the world, the material world that we live in, is a world defined by entropy, right? And so unless you can grasp that and bring efficiency back into that to counter entropy, you're going to end up with insufficient energy resources that your society actually needs to function. And that, I think, is what's unfolding in a sort of a big abstract, big picture kind of sense.
Yes. And final words to you, Carl. China is actually building out renewable energy on a scale that has never been seen before. So can you comment on what Dr. Powell has just said?
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Powell has mentioned already, to really do the huge AI build out, to build all these data centers for the so-called Stargate project, they actually need massive amount of electricity. But if you look at the electricity generation in United States versus China, you will see for the last 20 years, the power generation in United States is basically flat. And whereas in China, it's going straight up. And China is investing in everything. They're building wind power, solar, hydro, nuclear, and they are, China could, because China never put one they'll never put all the eggs in one basket. They're doing a across the board build out of their power generations, and this is also for national security purposes, because China is an oil and gas importer, is a fossil fuel importer. So, and U.S. Navy made very clear that they want to use Strait of Malacca as a choking point against the Chinese energy supply. So by building out these renewable energies, China is actually reducing its own dependency on foreign imported oil and gas. And we saw that this year, for the first time, the China's carbon emission is actually flatlining at the same time when the electric consumption has been rising by 4.7%. So this is because of the massive build out of renewables. And now, China can support itself with energy generated from the sun in the desert of Xinjiang, for example. So right now for China, they are actually best poised to lead the AI revolutions, because they actually have the energy to do it. They actually have plenty of cheap electricity and energy source to power this AI revolution. And because for US is all about PowerPoint presentation. China actually out there building. And this is and by the way, I want to remind people, the whole Huawei sanction, the latest sanction against Huawei chip, United States is trying to address a problem that it itself has created. Because before, China was perfectly happy to buy AI chips on NVIDIA, but United States government says, no, you cannot sell those NVIDIA chips to China. So NVIDIA came up with a neutered version of their best AI chip, H20. But Trump administration again banned the sale of H20 to China. So now Chinese company have no choice but to source from Huawei. And so but what the sanction applied to Huawei is saying is anybody who uses Huawei chips will be in violation of U.S. export control. What that means, actually, it means if a Chinese company with only catering to Chinese consumers, if those Chinese companies use Huawei AI chips, they will be in violation of the U.S. export control, and therefore they will be placed on the U.S. entity list and liable to be sanctioned by United States. But right now, with all these sanctions getting ridiculous, what's Washington going to do? Are they going to go basically? Are they going to return back to the days of 145% tariff on Chinese goods? Like we just experienced that last month. It has been a disaster. So I don't think they're gonna. And Malaysia just announced that they're gonna open a new AI data center using Huawei chips, and they're gonna use that to train DeepSeek. So what is the United States gonna do? They're gonna slap additional tariff on Malaysia? I mean, the countries in Southeast Asia, they have already cast their dies. They already made their choice. People like former Singaporean diplomat Kishore Mubani had repeatedly tell United States, do not make us choose between U.S. and China. We don't want to choose between U.S. and China. What he's really trying to convey to people in Washington is, you may not like the choice we'll have to make because we're going to choose China. And that's what happened.
And I think that's happening not simply in the ASEAN countries, but across the planet. I also know that there is a meme on the internet where the Chinese are asking the United States to sanction their soccer team because they've seen what a salutary effect that it has on any domestic endeavor. But on that note, I think we'll leave it at that. Carl, can you tell us where people can follow you?
I do have my own YouTube channel. It's just Carl Za, and I'm also a prolific ship poster on X. So it's under my same handle, Carl Za. I also run a podcast, Silk Steel podcast, out of Patreon, where I focus more on history, Chinese history. I'm doing chronological retelling of Chinese history from the very beginning. And right now I'm at around 400 BC, right at the beginning of China's Warring States period. So if that's your cup of tea, go to Patreon, look up Silk and Steel podcast, and support my surfing lifestyle in Bali. Thank you.
And Dr. Powell, where can people follow you or find you?
Look, probably the easiest place is to look at Substack. Warwick Powell, it's .substack.com. I think is how it works. So anyway, go to Substack and look for my name. And I don't think that there's too many Warwick Powells there, and there's plenty of stuff there.
And thank you, Dr. Powell, and thank you, Carl Za. And we look forward to continuing this dialogue at another moment. For our last segment, we want to show you, for a change of pace, unitary humanoid robots engaging in a kickboxing competition in China. Unitary's humanoid robots recently duked it out in a cyber kickboxing competition in Hangzhou, throwing jabs, hooks, crosses, uppercuts, knees, and roundhouse kicks, as well as taunting their robotic opponents. Let's watch.
So from them, we can see the spirit of resilience of human beings. So they never surrender to the opponent. So we hope that, look at this move. And this is the straight punch. And this is the right timing, and so AI calculator was pushed to the side of the ring, but it didn't fail, and you can see that energy is flexing his muscles, and he's being provocative. And now let's take a look at the last 10 seconds, last 4.